Okay, Rich, this is my 3D printable USP so far. It's probably about 80%, maybe 85% done. I've tried to design it with the features that I want and to be obviously 3D printable. Uh, this is a little bit bigger than a normal USP 45. Has about a 5.67 inch barrel. The standard ones are about 4.15 inches, so it's a little bit longer. It looks proportionally the same because the trigger guard is also longer, but that's kind of an illusion. I put a Picatinny rail in front, and I put this little bevel at the front too. I don't know if I'm going to leave that or not. It's not traditional, but I think it looks good. Start turning stuff off here. Slide off. So, barrel. I still got work to do on the trigger components back here, just getting everything to work like it needs to, but it's pretty much, I know how it works, and I've got it pretty much nailed down. Turn all this stuff off. Connector. Okay. What I want to show you is the rail system I designed to go inside this. Obviously, the normal USPs are injection molded with the rails in the mold, and they're permanently installed. So you can't change them or fix them, and obviously I can't 3D print around steel. It's got to be a chunk of plastic into which I install rails that I've machined. So that's kind of the trick here. My original idea was to have two basic, more or less U-shaped pieces that would get pinned in the front and the back. I changed that idea. I'm sticking with a U-shaped piece in the front, but in the back we're going to have two separate pieces, one for either side, similar to what the FNX 45 has in the front, actually. Down trigger. Okay. So, everything that's blue right here is going to be a single piece of polymer. It'll be 3D printed in fiber-filled nylon. It'll just be black plastic, basically. And then the blue stuff right now is going to be the steel inserts. So up front we have a single piece of steel. This is pretty complicated geometry, particularly seeing as how it has rails on the inside of it to accommodate the sliding guide rod that the USP has. But I think it's doable on a manual machine. So it has 3 holes in it. This one, the big one, is for the slide stop pin. This little one is for the trigger pin. And then I added a pin up front for a separate pin just for security's sake, primarily because of the cutouts in the frame for the trigger. Down in here, I don't know if you can see that or not. Down in here, there's these 3 cutouts for the trigger and the trigger spring to go in, and there's not a lot of material in there. I just turned off the rails, so this would be solid plastic, and I wanted to have another pin up front that's buried in a bit more material. So I put this extra pin in here. It's the only pin that I added to the design. The USP just has the trigger pin and slide stop up here, so I thought that was fine. There's not a whole lot of space between these 2 holes, so it doesn't crack, but there is quite a bit of material inside where it's got that bevel. Turn that back on. So moving back here, these 2 pieces in the back, it's really cramped back in here. There just wasn't room to have steel going along the bottom inside of the frame because the hammer strut has to sit down in there, and I just couldn't make it work. So I put 2 separate pieces, and I pocketed the frame so that they could slide down in there and be retained by the control pin / hammer axle, which I call the hub, and the sear pin, which will go through this little hole. Hopefully they're secure enough they don't crack. The plastic, I mean. Let me turn them blue again, just so you can see where they sit in here. Actually, turn the frames off. So this hole right here is not ideal because it does go through the front of that rail, but I had to move the sear pin down and forward because when I started making the slide, the loading bar was interfering with the trigger components, and it was just a nightmare. I think that's doable. I try to leave this as thick as possible, the steel, so it's hopefully can do its job, and it's pretty long, a little thin right there between the gigantic hole for the hammer hub and the edge of the rail, but we'll see how it works. This side is much less of a pain in the ass. That's a pretty robust piece of material. Got, plenty of material around the holes, so I'm not worried about that so much. But that right side is worrisome. Another issue has been the trigger bar. The trigger bar is a bent piece of sheet metal. Getting it to play well with the trigger components and the frame and leaving enough room for it to go back far enough to pick up the double action hooks on the hammer has been kind of tricky. Modeling bent sheet metal in Fusion 360 is a bit different than doing other stuff, so I may end up changing this some more. I don't know, but I think it's doable. This is probably this little arm on here is gonna get shortened, I think. I could have made it easy on myself. I just omitted the double action hooks on the hammer and said, screw it, it's a single action only, which is how I'm going to use it anyway. But I went ahead and modeled the decocker and everything, so I figured, why not? If it's got a decocker, it may as well have hooks on it, double action hooks. So, pretty confident that I can pull it off, provided I get the tooling to do it. The magazine catch is different on mine than it is on the real gun, primarily because of concerns about the thickness of the frame in certain spots. So it's got 2 springs instead of 1 big one, and it's going to be, the paddles are 3D printed, hopefully, and pinned onto the actual catch. One of the advantages of having this paddle mag catch on here is that it's easy to adjust the height of the magazines in the frame once it's done, because you can just remove material from the top, unlike a push button, which would entail actually modifying the magazines. So I think that's a significant benefit. I considered omitting the much famed USP recoil reduction system, which I'm pretty doubtful about its efficacy to begin with, but I figured I'm building the USP, I might as well build a USP. So, find it in my list here. The recoil spring has that double spring system on it, where it will slide back a little bit in the frame to absorb the impact of the barrel. Where's my guide rod at? No, there it is. Okay, so, and this, the guide rod has the unlocking surface on it, so it's important that it be in the right spot, and it has enough room, I think, back in here to slide back. The barrel, the locking surfaces are as close as I can get it to the real gun, but the bottom is a little bit different. I may have to adjust the height of this surface in the frame, and I haven't finished cutting or modeling the feedway yet. This is too high, and these surfaces need to be pushed down. Actually, making the barrel doesn't concern me a whole lot because there are really cheap rifling buttons available from China for like 30 bucks a piece. They're tungsten carbide. People have used them to make good barrels, so I'm not really worried about rifling the barrel. It'll get turned out of 4140 and then heat treated and rifled. So, and same as the slide. The slide's going to be 4140 as well. What really concerns me is making the small parts. The sear and the hammer and stuff. Those are really complicated geometry, and if I was smart, I would have designed this thing to accept off-the-shelf USP internals, and I could just buy them from Midwest Gunworks and drop them in, but I wasn't that smart, so I just started designing this thing kind of on a whim, and I had the idea to do it, and I was just going to make kind of a rough sketch, but then I just, that rough sketch turned into the frame, so I just kept going with it, and, it's been a learning experience, to be sure. Slide back on. I haven't finished cutting the ejection port. It'll need an extractor. I haven't made the firing pin channel, the firing pin itself, or the firing pin safety yet. I left these, or I added these front cocking serrations. I think they look good. They were present on a prototype of the Mark 23 pistol, but were never included in any production gun, either the Mark 23 or the USP series. So I thought it'd be cool to include them. I think they look good, and they match the spacing and everything from the original pistols. So, modeling the slide stop itself was kind of a pain. I'm sure making one is going to be even worse, but we'll see how it goes. The control levers, I put ambi levers on it. Those are going to be 3D printed, and then there'll be one end is going to be epoxied onto the control axle itself, and the other end is going to be pinned on so it can be removed. The trigger might get recontoured. As you see it, it's in single action. It has, I think, 50 degrees of travel. So when it's in double action, it's way out here. And I'm trying to improve the trigger. The trigger on the USP is not particularly good. It's light in single action, but the reset is really long. So I'm trying to get rid of that. And fingers crossed that it turns out. I can put checkering on the frame, front and back strap pretty easily. But modeling a pebble texture on a side like the original has is proving pretty difficult. I can't do it in Fusion. I've got to put it in a different piece of software and do it, and it hasn't worked yet. So one of the things that's nice about 3D printing is it's easy to change this stuff. So if it doesn't work, I can try again, but that's that. Hopefully it turns out, this will probably take a year or more to even get close to being done with the actual gun, but it's been fun to play with, and I'll keep you up to date as it progresses. Thanks.